Welcome to the Vandy 24/7 podcast. I'm Elena Morris here with Brandon Bigsby. And Brandon, big night last night for the Vanderbilt Commodores. They moved to 18-4. They took down the Florida Gators 99-86. But by all means, four straight wins is not the headlines. It's Michaela Blakes 53 points. I mean, what a performance last night from the freshman.
Yeah, Elena, sets the new NCAA record for most points in a game scored by a freshman. That's Division One, Division Two, Division Three, men's, women's, regardless of it all. Michaela Blakes with the best scoring performance of all time for the NCAA as a freshman. And we were just talking about this. We talked a little bit about it last night. Not only was it impressive just because of the 53, but she did it in every single way possible and did it efficiently. 16 for 24 from the field, 5 for 9 from three, and 16 from 18 from the free throw line. According to Shea Ralph after the game, Michaela Blakes was a little upset with herself that she missed the two free throws. So just absolutely insane what she was able to do, not just in a game like that, but Vanderbilt only won this game by 13. If Michaela Blake scores 39, they lose. Like, it is absolutely insane what she was able to do. And literally just a history making performance that we saw from her last night. We've been impressed by her before, and she just continues to somehow raise that bar a little bit higher every time.
Yeah, I mean, watching her all year, coming into the year, Shea Ralph had talked about she's special, she's different, and like watching her through the year, it's been very, it's been evident. We've seen it over and over again. We saw it last week when she had the putback against Tennessee. I mean, that was all over the place, Sports Center and everything, but she, I guess was missing the headlines a little bit and decided to do something again this week because, like you said, 53 points, most among a true freshman, but also that's an SEC scoring record. That's the most among any player in the SEC. She passed Carolyn Penn from South Carolina, who set that record in 2001. And sorry, Camille Pierre, your record didn't last too much longer. She had 42 points against Evansville earlier this year. That set a Vanderbilt program record for most points in a game. And Michaela Blakes, her own teammate, just went ahead and passed that by. So, I mean, just tons of records broken last night. You mentioned the efficiency. It was, I mean, just the way she was scoring, the level she was scoring at, it was incredibly impressive. And talking to Shay after the game, I'd kind of asked, you've coached a lot of basketball and you've coached at UConn and some of the best basketball players have come through there. And by all means, I was not trying to play the comparison game because there have been some elite players to wear the Husky uniform. But when Shay had started to talk about it, she said internally, Michaela Blakes reminds her of Maya Moore. And on the floor, the effort, like she's plays so effortless, it reminds her of Brianna Stewart. That is high compliments for Michaela Blakes.
Yeah, you're talking about not just two of the best players in UConn history, but two of the best players in recent women's basketball history. You talk about Maya Moore. She's up there in that Mount Rushmore of goats for the WNBA. She's someone that retired a lot earlier in her career than what she could have, did so optionally, left on her own terms, and pretty much dominated most of her prime. And then obviously Brianna Stewart, one of the better wings and bigs that you find in the WNBA still today. So obviously Michaela Blake's a much different player than those two, but you talk about the intangibles and just the relentlessness, the work ethic, and Shea Ralph kind of joked after the game talking about just the competitiveness of Michaela Blake's like you can't play a game with Uno with her without it getting too fiery. So, it kind of is something that you saw tossed around on Twitter last night, and you don't want to get too far ahead of things. And I feel like we all kind of felt this, but I feel like you can maybe say this now, Elena, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it too. It feels like the whole conversation with Michaela Blake went from, oh, she's a really good player. I think we said that from the first time we saw her in that game against Lipscomb. She dropped, I think, 26 points. Then you see what she's doing in the SEC. And it's like, okay, she's a great player. Like, she is a great freshman already. Now I think you're at the point to where you're starting to have conversations to where she might genuinely be a generational type of player. And when I say that, you think about players that every now and then they come into a program and they do something big that changes the scope of where that program is. You think of players like a Juju Watkins at USC, like Caitlin Clark at Iowa, or Sabrina Ionescu a few years back at Oregon. Michaela Blakes has all of the potential in the world to be one of those players, one of those generational players that you only see come around ever so often. And I know that sounds like a massive step, but think about this. 53 points as a freshman. That is unheard of. I mean, I think there's a genuine conversation now to where Michaela Blakes could very well end up being one of easily the stars of women's college basketball for the next 3 years at least.
I mean, all I could do just now is nod my head in agreement with everything you said because, like, I mean, last night I went on Twitter and I saw comparisons to Caitlin Clark. Now, they might not play the exact same way, but Caitlin Clark became the face of women's basketball for Iowa. And, Iowa doesn't have a rich women's basketball history like your Tennessee, your UConns, and all these other big programs, UCLA, things like that. But everybody knows about Iowa now because of somebody like that. And Michaela Blakes has the opportunity to do that with Vanderbilt. And when you can do that, you're just a special kind of player. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because there's a lot of season left, but after last night, it's hard to say that she hasn't solidified being the best freshman in the SEC. And right now, I think I mean, obviously, in the SEC, people who watch the SEC, it'd be a little easier for them to say, but if she's not leading that race for National Freshman of the Year, she's right there neck and neck with Sarah Strong. Obviously, Strong has had a great year. They do play a little bit differently. Obviously, Sarah's a forward, Michaela's a guard, but after last night, she is well known throughout the country. There is no, I mean, if you're a women's basketball fan, you can't say, I don't know who Michaela Blakes is anymore. That's not an option because if you watch women's basketball, you know. And I mean, it's just downright impressive. I mean, that's just the best way to describe last night.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you. And I feel like for a lot of Vanderbilt fans, there's been a lot of, contention about Michaela Blake. She should be freshman of the year for the SEC. She should be freshman of the year for the national side as well. For SEC, I honestly, and look, don't get me wrong, Joyce Edwards, I think is a great player. There's some really talented freshmen in the SEC. McGill, obviously, being one of those for Florida last night. She had a good game with 20 plus points. But when you just look at what Michaela Blakes is doing and how she's doing it, I don't really see how you can argue against her at this point. And again, on the national side as well, Sarah Strong having a really good season for UConn, a 20-12 team, a really, really historic program. Michaela Blakes, if she was behind Sarah Strong, now she's right there with her. And I think there's also something to be said about playing in the SEC. And that is no slight against Sarah Strong. That's no slight against UConn. But compare the Big East and the SEC, I think most people are going to say the SEC is a much tougher conference to play in and produce in than what the Big East is as well. And still a lot of basketball to play, obviously. Still a lot more than Michaela Blakes is going to have to do past today. This isn't, solidify her season or anything like that. But that was a performance that puts you on the map. So much so that she was featured on SportsCenter with an interview last night. Like, Vanderbilt is on the national radar. Michaela Blakes is on the national radar. And that was one of those performances that I think may have woken a lot of people up on the national scope that didn't already know who Michaela Blakes is and what she is made of and what she is capable of doing. That performance last night showed you exactly who Michaela Blakes is and that she arguably isn't just one of the best players or freshmen in the SEC. She's one of the best players or freshmen in the country, arguably. I mean, I saw a tweet last night from Kevin DeMille. He told her just the day before in practice, you're one of the best guards in the country and you need to act like it. And Michaela Blakes certainly took to that challenge, accepted it, and probably surpassed Coach DeMille's expectations. So just phenomenal what we saw from her last night. It's rare that you get to see history like that, Atlanta. So congratulations to Michaela and congratulations to Vanderbilt because that's a massive thing for that program as well. For them to recruit her, bring her in as a 5-star from Somerset, New Jersey, get her in the building says a lot about the direction that this program has taken and the job that Shea Ralph and her staff has done.
Yeah, I mean, you said it best. By all means, congratulations to Michaela and Vanderbilt. They're obviously, a big storyline that we haven't even touched on a podcast yet is they're in the top 25 in the AP top 25 for the first time in over a decade. And Michaela Blakes helped them get there. They're also ranked in the coaches poll. They're 23 in both. That's a big accomplishment too. It's the first time under Shea Ralph, and we've heard her, time and time again. She wants to build this program. She understands what this program can be. And this year, they're taking a massive step towards that. And like you said, the season's not over. Nothing she did last night is cementing her into any awards. And like I don't want to take away from any player, by all means. Joyce Edwards is a great player for South Carolina. Sarah Strong is a great player for UConn. But like you said, the Big East, not as strong as the SEC. In fact, I think a lot of people would argue the SEC is the strongest conference in the country. But, obviously Strong putting up good numbers. Edwards has had good games. But after you break the record for the most points scored in an SEC game, there's not gonna be a whole lot of compelling arguments to go against that. So Michaela Blakes just did exactly what she needed to do. You're right. She listened to Coach DeMille, but probably definitely exceeded his expectations last night. And just all around, I mean, she's helping take Vanderbilt to a whole nother level. And Brandon, I'd love to talk about the rankings because I think by now people understand, and they're probably tired of listening to us talk about it. But I know you and I could go on and talk about how special Michaela Blakes is. I don't think I'll get tired of that for a while. But the rankings, just where this program is at. I mean, a couple of years ago in Shea Ralph's second season with Vanderbilt, they only won 10 or 11 games. Right now, they're 18 and 4, 23rd in the country. They're fifth in the SEC. I mean, they're just exceeding expectations. And Shea Ralph she's doing something really special at Vanderbilt.
Yeah, and I mean, you talked about it, just the trajectory that this program has really been on with Shea Ralph. I mean, I think it's easy to forget that this is only year four for her. I mean, she's not been around in this program for all that long, and yet here she is leading this Vanderbilt team to tournaments, and now with their first AP poll ranking since 2014. I mean, just to see the trajectory of where Vanderbilt has gone has been absolutely massive. And it's funny. Obviously, you still have the game against Ole Miss coming up on Sunday. That's going to be a big game, a potential to redeem a pretty significant loss that they have on their schedule. But there's some teams ahead of Vanderbilt that lost in the last few days. So if Vanderbilt's able to come out on the winning side of that, they could very well end up being in the top 20 on Monday. But for Vanderbilt, even past all of that, that's looking well far ahead for them to be in that top 25 conversation, I think is huge because it feels like for the last year and a half, the conversation with Vanderbilt has been, well, they're right there. They're right on the cusp. They're maybe the 28th, 29th best team, but they can't beat those top 25 teams up there. Or they have a loss like they did against Missouri at home last year that knocks them out of that conversation. You're like, oh, Vanderbilt's just the middle of the pack team. It feels like Vanderbilt has figured out how to win those games. They've gotten over the hump. And again, I hate to keep wrapping up one player into all of this, but it feels like ever since that putback layup from Michaela Blakes beating ranked Tennessee at home at the buzzer, feels like Vanderbilt kind of has had that confidence instilled within them to say, we know we can go out and win. They always knew that. They always had that faith in that, but sometimes it takes seeing yourself do it to actually really believe it and then to continue doing it. And then they doubled down and beat Alabama a week later on the road, a really good ranked opponent that a lot of people had as a top four team in the SEC this year. So for Vanderbilt to have made this sort of progress and to not just stop there, but to continue building on it, I think it just kind of goes to show you where this Vanderbilt program is headed with Shea Ralph and this team. And again, this isn't just a team that has a ton of seniors. A lot of these players, assuming all things go right, are going to be back for this team next year. So this is a massive, massive momentum builder for Vanderbilt, and I think really puts them in a good spot, not just in terms of the rankings, but also just in terms of national perception of what this Vanderbilt team is and what they're capable of.
I think you summed it up perfectly. After that Tennessee game, things kind of changed and I don't want to go back too far from that, but there are some points I'd like to make because Ole Miss is coming up on Sunday. And if anybody remembers that game, I know a lot of Vanderbilt fans are trying to have short-term memory with that game because that, by all means, and I know the staff would agree to this as well, that was Vanderbilt's worst game this season. And talking to Shea Ralph after that, she said that, we didn't have a basketball problem. It was just some things they needed to look at internally and things they needed to fix and address. All right, what do we want to be from here on out? Then they went to LSU and almost took down the team that was number 5 in the country at the time. A couple plays would have gone differently. They could have ended up in the win column. And after that game, she said, "All right, this might be a galvanizing moment. Like these moments can turn the program and shift momentum." I mean, she talked about Marcus Freeman from Notre Dame and after the football team lost to Northern Illinois, he rallied them and said, "All right, let's go." They made it all the way to the national championship this year. So it takes those moments of weakness to learn kind of what your team is about. And I think after that Ole Miss game, this team did some reflecting internally and look at them since. I mean, they almost took down LSU. Now they've won 4 straight, and then they've got Ole Miss on Sunday. And I think this is going to be a really good opportunity and a great time for Vanderbilt to bounce back against Ole Miss because by all means, like Vanderbilt is capable of beating this Ole Miss team. And the Rebels, they struggled last night on the road. They only beat Georgia by, I believe, 5 or 6. It was not a large margin. And if anybody remembers, Vanderbilt handled Georgia pretty easily. So I'm not going to say that that's what's going to happen on Sunday, but I think that from when this team played Ole Miss a few weeks ago to right now, they've just done a complete 180. This is not the same team that we saw a couple weeks ago down in Oxford, who just looked completely unraveled against Ole Miss.
You know, Alana, when you were saying all that, there was a quote that I know we've both heard Shay Ralph say a few times, and mostly after losses. And it was the Michigan State game and this Ole Miss game that I think I really remember it stuck out when she said it. And I think you're seeing that come to fruition now. She said, sometimes to learn and grow, you just have to get your butt whooped. And that was exactly what happened for Vanderbilt in that Ole Miss game. They were run out of the gym. They never were competitive in that game. And it wasn't a talent issue whatsoever. None of it had to do with talent. None of it had to do with Vanderbilt not being capable. It wasn't a roster issue. It wasn't an athleticism issue. Vanderbilt just didn't really show up for that game. Quite honestly, they did not show up for that game. And you could tell that, Shay Ralph was really disappointed in that performance. And obviously, the team itself was really disappointed themselves. And they came out the next game and gave LSU all they could handle in Baton Rouge. And I felt like that ever since that loss, like you said, it feels like there's been a switch that's been flipped within this Vanderbilt team. They play LSU tight, only lose by 6. And that was Michaela Blakes really struggling in that game, too. I mean, she played probably her worst game of the SEC schedule in that game. Had, I think it was, 9 turnovers in that game, which was 12 points, went 4 for 13 from the field. Then they come back, they beat Tennessee. They respond with a win right after that against Arkansas, 41 plus differential in that game. They beat Alabama, then they beat Florida. But it feels like something that Shay Ralph has said they're talking about. Sometimes to grow the most, you have to just get your tail whooped and learn from it and then apply what you've learned and grow. We're seeing that in live action right now for this Vanderbilt team. And it feels like this Ole Miss game is an opportunity for them to really show that because that's where everything flipped. I mean, that's a team that they lost to by 28 points, were completely embarrassed by. And that little stretch with Kentucky and Ole Miss, those 2 losses, has kind of formed into this run where they really kind of changed and grown as a team. So, it's a game they're going to have a little bit of motivation for. I'm really interested to see how they look. And I'm interested to see what the crowd is going to look like as well. Seeing all of the pub that Vanderbilt's getting, their first home game as a ranked team in 11 years. Michaela Blakes just having the performance they did, all of the hype around this program right now. Chantel Anderson bobblehead night as well for some of the longtime Vanderbilt fans, a legend of this program. So a lot to be looking forward to at that game. But again, you just feel like that stretch and that growth. If you had to point to one reason that Vanderbilt had a number next to their name, I think that has to be the reason right there.
I mean, yeah, who doesn't want a bobblehead, Brandon? No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, definitely good incentive there. And, Vanderbilt doing a really good job of trying to promote this one. And because of Michaela Blake scoring 50, they're doing 50% off tickets. So Vanderbilt fans can thank Michaela for a good discount. But I think that that's what they're trying to do is, look, we have a good team here in Nashville. Let's get these people to come watch it. And it would be nice to see, that kind of support show up for this group. Like you mentioned, the first time they're playing at home as a ranked team in 11 years. I mean, that hasn't happened in a while. And so that's what they're trying to do is to get people into Memorial, get them excited and get them ready for this game. And we've talked about Michaela Blakes a lot, but man, I just want to touch on everybody else because the bench was super impressive to me last night in that Florida game. Camille Pierre, by all means, is an incredible player, but the last 2 games, she's really struggled from the field and might just be a little slump because she's taking those shots she can normally make. It just feels like they're not falling for her. And it's tough because when you have that kind of success and then things just don't go the right way, it can be tough to get back into that mindset of a scorer. Obviously, did a great job on the boards, 10 rebounds last night, had a double-double against Alabama where it wasn't her best shooting night. So she still impacts the game on the boards, on defense, things like that. But the bench last night, I mean, Ayanna Moore, obviously not off the bench. She had an incredible game, 22 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists. I mean, that's incredibly solid. And then Madison Green off the bench. I thought Justine Pissot had a great night off the bench. And I think that was kind of the issue last year where they were just right outside the top 25. They were knocking on the door. They didn't have that depth. And when you can bring players in like Leilani Kapanis to do the things that she does too, that is where that is going to show up in success. And Shay Ralph credited her bench last night because she thought they really helped out, stepped up, and played a big role in the win alongside Michaela's 53-point game.
Yeah, and you talked about Ayanna Moore, and she ended up fouling out in that game last night, but she was really, really impressive. I thought that was outside of the fouls and she had a few turnovers, I thought that was her best performance, arguably, of the season in terms of all around play. The 22 points, yes, but she also had 7 rebounds and 6 assists as well. So she was doing a little bit of everything. Camille Pierre obviously struggling from the field, but the one thing I will say about Camille Pierre, and I know it's kind of easy to, be down on the player when their last 2 games against Alabama, she was 4 for 19 from the field. Last night against Florida, she was 1 for 10. She still was contributing despite not scoring. She had 11 rebounds last night. She had 14 rebounds against Alabama, had 5 steals in that Alabama game, and had, I think, 3 steals last night against Florida. So even though Camille Pierre, the scoring hasn't been there and the shot hasn't been falling, she's still been able to be an impact out on the floor. And that's really, really important, especially in the SEC. If your scoring isn't going to work, okay, you have to find ways to contribute in other ways. Camille Pierre is still a positive on the floor despite her points and her shooting not being what we saw throughout the first few months of the season. But you talked about the bench, Elena. I mean, there's really, I think, a few names that you could really kind of look at. I mean, the one person that really stands out to me was Justine Bassett. I mean, what she did in the second quarter at 7 points in that quarter was a perfect 3 for 3 from the field, had a big three, had a couple of rebounds. It's easy to forget that she didn't touch the floor for a single minute just days before against Alabama. I mean, she was not on the floor at all, had no impact. People were kind of wondering, like, what happened to Justine Bassett's minutes? That's a player that was a starter for this team in 30 of their 33 games last year, and now she's not even seeing the floor in SEC play. She came out there and did a little bit of everything. And Shea Ralph was really complimentary of her after the game. Ina Mitchell, I thought, had some really good plays, had a few really key blocks down low, had 17 minutes, was really able to eat up a lot of space with Camille Pierre not being out on the floor during that fourth quarter against Florida yesterday. I mean, there were a lot of players that really stepped up. I mean, Madison Green hit a massive three in the fourth quarter when it felt like Florida was maybe starting to get a run. They cut it down to 8. And then Madison Green hits that huge three to put Vanderbilt back up 11, and they were really just able to kind of make it a free throw game. So a lot of players on that Vanderbilt bench really did step up. And as you mentioned, the depth had been really one of the kind of lacking areas of this team in the first few years of Shea Ralph's tenure. Not an issue at all this year, especially when you have multiple players at different positions, both guard and wing. And now a big two and Aiyana Moore that can step up, eat some minutes, and not just eat up minutes, but be productive in that time as well.
I'm so glad you brought up the three-pointer by Madison Green because that felt like the go-ahead bucket. Because it felt
Yeah.
like in the fourth quarter, Florida was really making things uncomfortable. It was like, all right, Vanderbilt has a pretty good lead right now, but Florida was within striking distance. They were, just ready to get going. They were chomping at the bit, no pun intended. But I mean, just that pass too from Michaela Blakes, no surprise there, finding Madison Green in the corner. That three just felt like, all right, Vanderbilt has got this one under control. That was a huge play in the game. And I mean, like we talked about, Iona Moore, great night. Michaela Blakes, nothing more to say there about her night. But on a night where Camille Pierre, has struggled the last couple of times and Vanderbilt's still able to do the things they've done, it's going to be very dangerous for opponents when Camille Pierre finds her groove a little bit again because we all know it's there. She's got that swagger about her when she plays. And so when she can get it going, having Michaela and Camille and Iona Moore all as threats on the floor, it's going to be tough for teams down the stretch to be able to guard Vanderbilt.
It's funny too, Elena, because I know we kind of talked about this earlier, but it's interesting because Camille Pierre last night went 1 for 10 from the field, and her one make was a three, which was her second made three all season. I mean, it was just kind of a weird game for her. And you mentioned that Camille Pierre is as talented as they come. She's shown that she can score at this level. It's not just an issue of, oh, she was doing it against these mid-major teams and she can't do it. No, that's not the case. This is the same player that just dropped 29 points against a top 10 LSU team just 2 weeks ago. Camille Pierre is going to get it going. Sometimes you go through those slumps, and it's a mental game too, and you have games like this. I mean, I mentioned it. The game before against Alabama, she was 4 for 19 from the field. So you combine those two games. Camille Pierre is 5 for 29 in her last 2 games. That can get to you a bit as a player, and she's still a young player. Camille Pierre is only a sophomore. This is her first season starting. She hasn't had this big of a role and this big of a contribution on a team at this level before. So sometimes it's going to take some time. This is just a part of that battle of being a student athlete and being an athlete of any stretch. I mean, you go through these slumps sometimes, and you have to get yourself out of it. And it's just as big to kind of get yourself out of it mentally as it is on the physical side of it. But when she gets her groove going, when you combine it with what Michaela Blakes is doing, the way Ayana Moore has been playing these last few weeks, I think she's been getting better and better over this SEC stretch. And then you combine it with the bench production. You have players like Leilani Kaplan that's putting in really good minutes. Players like Madison Green and Ayanna Mitchell and Justine Bassat really contributing and stepping up. When all of those pieces gel together and they all get it going, this is a Vanderbilt team, and I don't think anyone in the country is going to be excited to play. And remember, obviously, it's still 6.5 weeks until we get a bracket. This is still a Vanderbilt team that could very well be hosting games at Memorial Gym for March Madness time. There's still a lot for this team to play for. They're tied for fifth in the SEC right now, tied with Ole Miss, ironically enough. So that's another reason that game in 48 hours time is going to be so big. When Vanderbilt gets everything going and it's a collective, it's going to be a scary, scary sight for whoever's got them on their schedule for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're kind of reading my mind today. I wanted to bring up the bracketology, obviously 6 weeks away, but I think one point I want to make before I get to that is the fact that Vanderbilt was able to go 2-0 during that stretch where Camille Pierre wasn't playing her basketball on
Yeah.
the road too. Not at home, on the road. That says a lot about Vanderbilt as a whole. So I think Shea Ralph will look to get Camille Pierre back in Memorial, be like, hey, you're at home, you're comfortable with this gym. Let's get you in a rhythm again. So the fact that they were able to win both their games at Alabama and at Florida when she had, been in a little bit of a shooting slump, I think that's a good sign for Vanderbilt that they can handle that without her level of production that they're used to. But like you said, the bracket, 6 weeks away. I know we've got, some time. I don't want to get a little bit, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but right now, Vanderbilt's projected as a 6 seed, and it feels like again they're knocking on the door of potentially hosting. Seeds 1 through 4 will host the first 2 rounds of the NCAA tournament. At one point of the season, they were, I think, a 4 or even 5, right around that. And so, looking at what's left on the schedule, I think that it's starting to get a little easier to predict what could happen. I think Sunday's game is going to be the biggest toss-up left as far as, maybe flipping a coin to see who would win. You've got Texas and South Carolina. South Carolina being at home, obviously that is one of the best teams in the country. That's going to be a very, very tough game for any team to win, playing against a Dawn Staley team. Of course, and then down at Texas, that's also tough. Vic Schaefer has a really good squad. Madison Booker, Rory Harmon. Those are your two toughest games. Ole Miss is your toss-up, and I feel like everything else, Vanderbilt should be the favorite, except maybe Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma's that other one that I failed to mention just now. But looking ahead, it feels like they could get to the point where, all right, if you lose 3 of these last, I believe, 7 or 8 games, you're finishing around 23-7, 24-6. That puts you in a really good spot. And then depending on what you do in the SEC tournament too, Vanderbilt could very well be the host if they win these games like Ole Miss, like Oklahoma, things like that. So it's kind of at the point, all right, you can control what you can control. And if you put yourself in a good spot for March, you might not have to leave Nashville when tournament time comes around.
Yeah, and it's funny. I think too, if things go right for Vanderbilt, if they win these games that we think that they likely should win, and you combine that with some of the games that they've won already, I mean, there's some teams that they're going to be battling for those hosting rights that they've beaten. Teams like Tennessee, teams like Alabama. Really, the only team in the SEC that they didn't beat that they probably would be competing for hosting rights is Kentucky. And I don't really think that there would be a lot of doubt about Kentucky hosting at this point. That's a team that I honestly think could very well make a run with how good they are. We saw them up close in person. But realistically, like you said, Elena, looking at the schedule, I mean, Ole Miss, that's a toss up. Oklahoma, I think that's a toss up. I think you'd probably favor Oklahoma just because they are the home team and they're number 13 in the country. But it's still a game I think Vanderbilt can go out and win if they go out and play what they're capable of. Really, the only ones I think you're kind of looking at is like, yeah, that's going to be tough is Texas and South Carolina. Those are two of the best teams in the country, two teams that could very well end up being number one seeds in the bracket. But the rest of it for Vanderbilt, pretty wide open. Mississippi State at home, Texas A&M at home, Missouri at home. And what I really like about Vanderbilt's end of the season is that their last 3 games are all Memorial Gym. That game at South Carolina is at home. That game against Texas A&M is at home. The game against Missouri is at home. So that last stretch of the season are all games in Memorial Gym. And as we know, Vanderbilt this season, a very, very good team at home, only one home loss this season. And now is that game against Kentucky that we mentioned earlier. So you kind of combine what the schedule looks like with where the rankings are, and with Vanderbilt currently being tied for fifth in the SEC, a chance to take that outright if they beat Ole Miss on Sunday. There's really a lot of opportunity for the Commodores to get, I mean, at bare minimum, a 5 seed, I think, in this tournament. They really got a good shot. The schedule lines up well for them. Now, again, they're going to have to keep playing the way they have been, and not only that, but keep improving on it because teams around them are going to keep getting better. Vanderbilt's going to have to keep getting better too. But the point of all this is that everything is ahead of them. They control their own destiny. The question now is, can they go out there, capitalize on that, and take advantage?
Yeah, most definitely. And you mentioned it, the signature wins like Tennessee and Alabama. I mean, before Vanderbilt played him, those were teams who were projected to be a 4 seed. And as soon as they lost, they dropped out and they're not projected to host anymore. So Vanderbilt took them out of that equation. So when it comes down to it of, all right, who's going to host? Vanderbilt or Alabama, Vanderbilt or Tennessee, Vanderbilt's going to have the leg up there and be like, all right, we beat this team head on. We should be able to host. That's kind of what their mindset is with winning those games. Obviously, the Kentucky game you mentioned, but man, they're looking really good right now. I didn't know what to expect with a new team, Kenny Brooks, all of that, but the Wildcats have looked very, very good. And like you said, at this point, Vanderbilt just got to control their own destiny. And I think that talking to Shea Ralph as much as we do, we've kind of understood the mindset she has with her team. All right, your next game is the very most important one on the schedule. Don't look too far ahead. It's the next one. And I think that when we hear from the players like Mikayla or Camille, that's the first thing they tell us. The next game's the most important. And so she has driven that mindset into those players. They understand it. And I think that she is telling them what they need to hear, what they need to understand, and just kind of what they need to know, mentally and physically going forward about what they have to do to win these sort of games. And she's put them in a very good spot in just her fourth season in Nashville.
Yeah, and I think too, just kind of you talk about tournaments, you talk about resumes, and you talk about, what is the committee going to look at? And something else to remember too, and we haven't mentioned this, this is the first year of the new quadrant system for women's basketball as well. Vanderbilt has a lot of opportunities to continue to rack up these quad one wins. And I think similarly, we make this point about the men's team, Joey, Billy, and I all do, is that the men's team has yet to take a bad loss. Vanderbilt women have yet to really take a bad loss. Their worst loss of the season is against Ole Miss, a team that was ranked in the top 25 all year. It was a loss on the road. They played their worst game of the season, and they have a chance to redeem that in just 2 days' time. The rest of Vanderbilt's losses, neutral site loss against a ranked Michigan State team, a tight loss against a ranked LSU team, and an 18-point loss against a ranked Kentucky team. So Vanderbilt's resume as a whole is also really impressive. They have some decent wins. They have a good resume. They've yet to take a bad loss so far. So not only have they beaten some of the teams in the SEC that they're going to be competing with for seeding and potentially for hosting rights, but they don't have really any bad losses in there either. And again, there's still 9 games, 8 games left on the schedule. You never know what can happen. I mean, we saw Missouri; they went and got their first win and surprised a lot of people in doing so. Texas A&M has been on a bit of a run. They could maybe sneak in a win late. So there's some things that can happen. Mississippi State is never a team that you can sleep on either. That game will be in a couple of weeks at Memorial. But if Vanderbilt can just continue doing what they're doing, winning the games they're supposed to win, staying competitive in some of those other games like Ole Miss, like Oklahoma, steal one of those games maybe against one of those ranked teams that are left, you never know what can happen. This is a team that is in the top 25, does have everything in front of them. And again, you still have that SEC tournament as well. If Vanderbilt somehow gets on a run and makes it to, say, the semifinals, it's going to be pretty hard to deny that they are a top 4 or 5 seed in the NCAA tournament. So it's going to be really fun to watch. And I think the biggest thing is that, unlike many of the past years, Vanderbilt has everything ahead of them, not just in terms of, oh, they're trying to make the tournament. Last year, we were talking about, oh, are they going to make it? They're on the bubble. Vanderbilt has everything else ahead of them right now. Their tournament spot, I think, is more than sealed. It's about how far can they push this and can they set themselves up for something even further than that now.
Yeah, most definitely. Like you said, they don't have a bad loss. All of them are quad one. I had looked at that after Vanderbilt had gotten ranked. So, I mean, by all means, those are four really good teams, really good ball clubs who have put up some really impressive wins this year. And so, nothing that they've done in the column of losing is going to hurt them. They have won the games they're supposed to. They've won games that they might have not supposed to. I mean, they weren't favored against Tennessee or Alabama. And so, like you said, down the stretch, if they can pull off an upset, if they can win the 50-50 games, it's going to really help them going forward. And you never know when March comes around. I mean, it's up for it's up for grabs. I mean, it's anybody's game, and it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the Music City because I mean, they like to say dancing in March. There's music in Nashville. We'll see what happens, Brandon. But Sunday, very good opportunity for Vanderbilt, and man, the fans around here should be excited with all of the basketball going on. Mark Byington and the men's team, they've got it rolling. Shea Ralph and the women's team have it rolling, and Mikayla Blakes, 53 points last night against Florida. That's the most by any player in the entire country this year. And it's just been a lot of fun for you and I to cover, to watch, and it's a great year. And we're looking forward to seeing what happens on Sunday. But any last thoughts from you, Brandon?
Yeah, I think that Sunday game is just going to be so exciting for so many reasons. Obviously, all the excitement and the hype right now for just what this Vanderbilt team is doing, but also just in terms of what this game means. I mean, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I think this game has higher stakes than what Tennessee or Alabama did, just because of what Ole Miss did to this team just a few weeks ago. How much has this Vanderbilt team grown when they have to go up and go against that same monster that took them out just 3 weeks ago and kind of left them at the lowest place they had been all season? What is the response to that going to look like? And then again, Ole Miss, a team that is, trying to kind of pass Vanderbilt in the SEC rankings. They're both tied for fifth. They both have a 5-3 record. This could be a game we look back on to where it's like, hey, Vanderbilt got a 4 seed and they're not going to have to play until the third night. And that Ole Miss game is a big reason as to why they finished right behind them. So you just never really know what can happen. And it feels like that game against Ole Miss, there is a lot on the line in that game, a lot of excitement for that game. I'm interested to see what happens. And then again, just can Vanderbilt continue growing and continue building? They're not satisfied at all. We hear Shea Rob say it all the time. We're not aiming to just be a ranked team. We're not aiming to just beat this team or that team. We're aiming to play for championships. And that is the goal for this program. It's going to be interesting to see how they can continue to do that and what that next step for them is going to be. They've gotten ranked in the top 25. That's kind of been that goal, that benchmark that people have looked at. What is that next step for Vanderbilt, and can they take it?
Well, that'll wrap up our women's basketball coverage brought to you by Butler Holdings here on Vandy 24/7. For Brandon Bigsby, myself, Elena Morris, we appreciate everyone supporting us here at Vandy 24/7. We'll look forward to bringing you guys coverage at Memorial Gymnasium on Sunday against Ole Miss, and that'll be all for now. Thank you guys.